Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Travel Show with your host, Ted Blank of Ted Blank Luxury Travel and Adventure. Oh, Ted, it's so great to see you. I'm just going to go on record saying I kind of missed you. You've been gone the last couple of weeks. We did some best of shows, which was wonderful, but it's so great to see you in person. How have you been?
I've been doing really well, and as you said, yes, I was traveling a little bit, so just came back on Friday, and now here I am at the studio.
Well, tell us about your last trip.
Yeah, so we actually talked about this quite a while ago. This was a group trip that I put together and I led. And we went on a 12-night cruise from New York up through New England and Canada, all the way up the St. Lawrence River to Quebec City. And then we turned around and went back. And we had a chance to travel on board the Queen Mary 2. So it was a really neat experience. The ship was incredible. And what a beautiful place, beautiful time of the year to travel in New England and Atlantic Canada.
So the Queen Mary 2, for people that maybe have forgotten, would you tell the significance of that, please?
Yes. So the Queen Mary 2 is a totally unique ship. She is really the only ocean liner that exists in the world today.
And what does ocean liner mean?
So an ocean liner means that the Queen Mary 2 was built to cross the Atlantic between England and America. That was the trade that she was constructed for. And so unlike cruise ships that are designed to spend time in kind of the relatively sheltered waters of the Caribbean or the Mediterranean, Queen Mary 2 goes across the North Atlantic. So the design is totally different. It is a floating grand hotel in reality, and it's designed to spend a lot of time at sea. And so the onboard facilities are just incredible. And there is so much to do on the ship that it's almost like, oh my gosh, there's a port. Oh, how do we find time in our day to get off and go to the port? So it's a really different experience.
Is it built stronger then to withstand the ocean?
Yes, it's built stronger. It's built to withstand much rougher waves and changes in temperature and stuff like that. It has plenty of open deck space for when the weather's nice. But if the weather isn't nice, there is an indoor pool and a lot of things you can do inside as well. The facilities are incredible. There's a planetarium on board the ship, and then everything you would expect from a cruise ship, dining rooms and lounges and a beautiful spa, an indoor spa with a thermal suite, where you can go in and you can sit in the sauna and you can go into the steam bath and just everything you can imagine on a cruise ship, done in a really elegant way. Like I said, the Queen Mary 2 is kind of a floating grand hotel. And it's funny because I always have this rule when I take cruises that you have to at least take the stairs down, and you should try to take them up, to work off. Because, 45 minutes since you last ate, so it's good to work that off. But the floors are really, really high. The grandeur of the ship design means that the floors are really, really high. So when you get up to the top of, after going up 2 floors, it's like 4 floors on a regular cruise ship.
And is that to give the illusion of more space?
Yeah, it is really very spacious, very elegant, very grand.
High ceilings.
High ceilings, harkening back to really kind of the golden age of travel. And so it's a beautiful ship, very modern, all the modern conveniences. There's nothing old-fashioned about it. But it's a great venue to use to go to see this beautiful part of the country as well.
So this ship usually just goes back and forth, and then is this the shoulder season or something, or how did you get to ride on it up to Canada?
Yeah, so actually the Queen Mary 2 will cross the Atlantic Ocean, go for a cruise, and then cross back in many cases. So a lot of the people on this particular cruise were British, and they had gotten on in Southampton, which is near London, and they crossed the ocean for 7 days, and then this 12-day cruise up to New England and Canada, and then they went back home. But when we got off in New York, a lot of Americans got on. They were crossing 7 days over to Southampton, and then the ship was going up to Norway for 10 days before it goes back to Southampton and back. So it kind of combines cruising and crossing. Yeah, it's kind of a neat option that doesn't exist anywhere else.
Did you hug the shore then when you went up to Canada, or how far out were you?
So it's at some points you're out a fair distance, but then you make a turn and you enter the St. Lawrence River. And in most cases, once you've gotten into the river, you can see land on both sides.
So the river itself has to be pretty big to accommodate a ship like that.
Yes, it is. It accommodates ocean-going ships. And in fact, the ships that go to Duluth come through the St. Lawrence River.
Oh, okay.
Of course. The Queen Mary 2 is too large to go through to Duluth, but ships do make it from the ocean to Duluth.
So how large is the Queen Mary?
So Queen Mary is over 1,000 feet long, and they measure ships in a form of tonnage, which sort of has to do with like the volume of the ship, the volume of the interior space. And the Queen Mary 2, it measures about 158,000 tons. And that's a strange measure that doesn't mean anything to anybody. But if you've seen some of the ads on TV for like the Utopia of the Seas, which is the biggest cruise ship that's out there in the world, it's about 270,000 tons.
Oh, wow.
So Queen Mary's, smaller than that. The Utopia of the Seas carries about 6,700 passengers.
Oh.
Queen Mary carries 2,800.
Goodness.
So imagine all that space you have. It's uncrowded. I mean, it's really, really unique in that you have this massive
Relaxing
ship, but it's uncrowded. There's plenty of space, plenty of deck space, plenty of pools, plenty of places to get great scenic views. And it's just a really well done experience. Great entertainment. There are lecturers on board who will talk about the destination you're going to, as well as other things of interest. On this particular cruise, we had 2 kind of celebrity guest lecturers, and one was an astronaut, and one was an Olympian. On the last cruise I was on, Dr. Ruth was actually our guest lecturer. So they bring in people who are pretty well known to give sort of that celebrity insight conversation, but then they also have people who are experts in the area that we're traveling to. And so one of the lectures I went to was put on someone who talked about the Viking, because of course the Vikings eventually made their way over to Newfoundland.
They're 5-0,
Well, the other Vikings.
Oh, okay.
The other Vikings. Yes, sorry to confuse. Yes, I didn't think of that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And of course, it was topical because they came to what they called Vinland and what we would call Newfoundland in Canada. So we could learn a little bit about the places we were going.
When you were on this ship, did it make it easier then to get on and off because of the fewer people?
Yeah, again, with just that big ship, relatively small numbers of people, things tend to move pretty efficiently. So yeah, it works out very well.
And did you have like a high tea and all that because of the
They have
British?
afternoon tea.
Okay.
Yes, they do. Every day they have afternoon tea, and it's served in a beautiful public room called the Queen's Room, which has a lot of memorabilia from previous Cunard ships. So, for example, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was the person who christened the original Queen Elizabeth, the ocean liner that was built in the 1930s. So she gave her flag to the Cunard line, and it's actually mounted there, and you can see it, and they have paintings. They have a bust of Queen Mary, who christened the original Queen Mary ocean liner in 1936. So beautiful space, and they have afternoon tea there every day with finger sandwiches and white glove service and scones and little sweet pastries, and it's just a really neat experience. And the entertainment is fantastic in the evening when the ship has left port and you're sailing on to the next port. After dinner, you can enjoy a great show. They have dancing, ballroom dancing, they have a disco, everything really for everyone there.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's just a nice experience, and this is a great itinerary for this ship because it starts and ends in New York, which is an easy place to get to. It's a 2.5-hour flight. Sometimes it takes you longer to get from the airport into Manhattan than it takes to get to the get from Minneapolis to Manhattan. But we had a chance to spend a couple days in New York beforehand. And the hotel we stayed at was actually right on Times Square, and so it happened to have a rooftop bar. And if you looked straight across from the rooftop bar, there was the ball that gets dropped every year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you could almost touch it.
Wow, because you're up that high.
Yeah, so every New Year's, this hotel has a big New Year's party. I think it's a little more expensive than a normal night at this hotel. But we got to see a lot of New York. We got to take the Circle Line cruise that goes around Manhattan. We went to the World Trade Center Memorial. We walked through Central Park. So just an interesting place to start or end a cruise.
And that was an add-on that you did?
Yes, correct. So you could actually just fly out and hop on the ship and head out. But I always think it's nice to get there a day or two early, and especially if the airlines are feeling mischievous and they delay your flight. But it's also just, an excuse to spend a little time in New York and just enjoy that time before you start the cruise.
So where do you cruise out of in New York?
There are 3 cruise terminals in New York. One is the old ocean liner piers, which are along the Hudson River. And so many cruise ships depart from there. The Queen Mary 2 is too big for that particular dock, and so it leaves from Brooklyn. And then there's a third terminal near the airport in Newark that is for the even bigger ships than the Queen Mary 2. But we happened to be there on the day that there was a harvest moon, which means that there is exceptionally high tide. And so the Queen Mary has to fit underneath the Verrazzano-Narrows Bridge. And I guess there's 16 feet between the top of the funnel and the Verrazzano-Narrows Bridge.
Oh.
So you go under it and you're kind of just like,
No
I hope
kidding.
we make it.
Oh, goodness.
But yes, so you start out by going past the Statue of Liberty, under the Verrazzano-Narrows Bridge, and then north to Canada.
Oh, my goodness. Those are things that you really do take for granted, that high tide is going to change
Exactly.
how high your ship is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, it's interesting how complex navigation of a cruise ship is. I mean, it's a pretty big undertaking for them to do it and make it look so effortlessly.
So do they still only have one captain of a ship?
Yes, there's one captain and then other officers, and the crew on this ship is a little over 2,000 people. So there's almost one employee per
That's great
passenger.
service.
So a very high level of service.
And would you say this is probably one of the nicest cruise lines you can go on?
You know, it's very interesting. Because it's a large ship, there is a really broad array of accommodations. So they have staterooms on there that would be very similar to the staterooms you would have on any other cruise ship in terms of the size. And the price actually isn't that much higher than, say, a Princess cruise or Norwegian cruise going on the same itinerary. They do have suites in an area they call the grills, which really that's a whole separate world. And that probably would qualify as probably the best cruise line at sea, the grills portion of the Queen Mary 2. But the nice thing is that it's a luxury cruise line, but it comes at kind of a value price. And so it isn't that much more expensive than a regular cruise would be versus some of the smaller ship luxury cruises that are quite a bit more expensive. So if you've cruised a few times and you're like, maybe I'd like to try something a little bit different, let's talk, because I think you might find that Cunard is a nice segue into that luxury space, but it doesn't come with the full price tag that a lot of the luxury cruise lines come with. And then once you've been hooked, you're hooked. Sorry, we've got you on the hook for that.
So when you say that it's an ocean liner, how many total ocean liners are there in the world?
There's one. This is it.
That's it?
This is it. Yep. The original Queen Mary is a hotel in Long Beach, California.
Yeah.
The QE2 is a hotel in Dubai. There is a ship in Rotterdam, Holland called the Rotterdam that was an ocean liner built in the 1950s, but they're all museums or hotels. And all the other cruise ships are just, variations on the regular cruise ship. So this is it. Totally unique in the world.
So why do you think that is?
It's a long story. Cunard Line is owned by Carnival Corporation. And Carnival Corporation purchased Cunard Line back in the 2000s, right about the time the Titanic movie was made. And they bought the Cunard Line, and then they very quickly built the Queen Mary 2. And I think part of it was to preserve the legacy of the brand. I think they do it to make money. They aren't a charity. I think it was also an opportunity for the owners of the Carnival Corporation to say, you know what, we can play with the big guys.
Right, we're as fancy
as well. We're as
yeah.
fancy as you are. And so I think that was part of the equation as well. But the cruise line has grown. They now have 4 ships. That's a record size for this particular cruise line. So you have the Queen Mary 2 that does the transatlantic crossings and cruises scattered in between. There's a ship based in Great Britain that does cruises to the Mediterranean, the Baltic, Iceland. There's a ship based in the Mediterranean almost all year round. And then the Queen Elizabeth is based in Alaska in the summer. And so I'm hosting a trip on that next August. And then in the winter of 2025, 2026, the Queen Elizabeth will be in Miami. And we'll be doing 10, 14, 20-day Caribbean cruises as well. So kind of close to home. And then every other year, the Queen Elizabeth goes down to Australia and spend some time there. And in the winter, all their cruise ships do world cruises, 60, 90, 100-day trips around the world.
Oh,
So
my goodness.
really a very unique cruise product out there. And this New England cruise is kind of a nice sampler, a nice way to get acquainted with it.
What were the leaves like?
They were getting there. We went to probably the most beautiful place we went is a place in Quebec called Saguenay Fjord. And it's a fjord, just like in Norway, which means it's a really deep stretch of water that only has one entrance and one exit. And the leaves there were turning colors. They weren't probably at their peak, but they were pretty close. And there's a national park there where you can actually go for a hike. Beautiful, beautiful park. And so that was probably where they were at their peak. Down in Maine, we stopped in a city called Rockland, Maine. They were just starting, kind of about what they are here right now. So we were maybe a week early to catch the peak of the fall colors. And of course, you never know from year to year exactly when they're going to pop out. So we saw some, and in Quebec City, we saw quite a bit. But I'd say if you were there today versus last week, you'd probably be right at the peak.
Well, and I think the leaves are late changing this year.
Yeah,
so
at least here they are.
Yeah, that's maybe
So
part
that's
of
the
reason.
one, the New England and Canada cruise season is pretty short. It's late September through mid-November, and everybody goes because they want to see the leaves. And, it's one of those things you can't quite predict. And so the good news is that there are a lot of other beautiful, fascinating, interesting things to see. But if the leaves are all out, that's just kind of the icing on
What
the
was
cake.
the favorite part of your cruise?
Well, I think the city of Quebec is probably one of the most interesting cities in North America. And we had a chance to visit the city of Quebec. The British built a big fortress on top of the hill called the Citadel of Quebec. And it's actually still an active military base. But it happens to be one of the homes of the Governor General of Canada as well. And so we had a chance to tour the Governor General's house in the Citadel. And there were only 2 people on the tour. So it was a very, very interesting tour. And then the next day we went and saw a waterfall called Montmorency Falls that's higher than Niagara Falls. And then we went to this immense basilica called the Basilica of St. Anne de Beaupré. And it's actually a pilgrimage site, but it's just this immense church in a tiny little town on the St. Lawrence River. And the colors there were absolutely beautiful, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful site. So Quebec City, I would say, is probably the highlight for me of this trip. We went to Halifax in Nova Scotia. It also has a fortress called the Citadel, ironically enough, there. That was very interesting. And it happens to be where they took a lot of the victims of the Titanic disaster to be buried. So there's a Titanic cemetery in Halifax. And we went to Saguenay Fjord, which I mentioned is a really beautiful city. We also went to a town called Sydney in Nova Scotia, which is on Cape Breton Island. And it's just, again, an incredibly scenic, you go for a drive along the coast, along a road that hugs the ocean. And it's just, every turn, scenery, lighthouses. And, you can stop and have a lobster roll and just really pretty area. So it's really a destination that's about the scenery, and it's one I would really recommend people think about. Maybe if you've been to Alaska and you want to do something that's different but gives you a chance to cruise a little bit, this is a place to do it. Beautiful scenery, interesting cities. It kind of has it all.
How can we sign up, please?
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of me is to give me a call at 651-964-8245, or you can visit my website, tedblanktravel.com, or if you happen to be in downtown Hudson, stop by our office at 206 Locust Street.
So great to see you.
Good to be back.
Love this trip. It sounds really fascinating. This show is called The Travel Show with your host, Ted Blank of Ted Blank Luxury Travel and Adventure.